If you're building AI agents, you've probably heard of MCP or Model Context Protocol. This new protocol, introduced by Anthropic, should make it easier for you to connect your own data sources to large language models. MCP is useful when you have a chat interface such as Claude Desktop. This chat interface should be compliant to MCP in order to connect to MCP servers. And in this video, I'll be focusing on showing you how you can build your own MCP server in under 10 minutes. We'll be using the MCP TypeScript SDK to create the MCP server, and then we'll be using tools from watsonx.ai Flows engine. And Flows engine is IBM's tool calling platform, which will make it possible for you to turn any data source into a tool in just a few commands. So let's get ready to start and dive into VS Code. In VS Code, I've set up some boilerplate code. I'm using the Model Context Protocol SDK, and then I'm using it to set up a server that has tool capabilities. For this, we need two things. We need to set up a request handler that will return the list of tools in a tool definition schema. And then we should have a request handler that is creating the actual requests to call the tools. And as you can see, we're doing some transporting here. I've used the default example from the MCP website where they have a tool to add two numbers together. So we have a tool that's called calculate sum. Its input schema is A and B. So these are the two numbers we'll be adding. And of course, they're both required. Then if we look at the place where the tool is actually executed, you can see we are looking for a tool called calculate_sum. And it's important to keep the tool names the same. So whatever you have for incoming request parameters as a name should be the name of something in your tool definition. And then we're taking the arguments, which are A and B, and then we're adding those up. So in order to use this in Claude Desktop, for example, which I will be using as my client and host, in order to use this, I need to create a build, and for that I run npm run build. This will create a build version of my MCP server, which is right here. And this build version can then be used in Claude. Once you build it, you need to go to a Claude Desktop config.json file, and in there you can see that I've set up a MCP server, which is taking my just build file. After doing this, I can open Claude Desktop. In Claude Desktop, you can now see there is a MCP tool available, which is calculate sum. You can use it to add two numbers together. So let's start asking a question which involves adding two numbers. So what is the sum of 9999 plus 1? If I use this, I will create a new chat with Claude. You can see it's going to ask me if I want to execute one of my tools from the MCP server. If you click here, you can actually see what it's trying to do. So it's going to try and add two numbers, 999 and 1 together. In here, you can see there's a human in the loop. So Claude Desktop is asking me if I want to execute this tool call. So this can help you to prevent malicious tool calls. I can allow it once, I can allow it for the entire chat history, or I can deny it. So let's allow for this chat. What's happening now? Claude is executing my tool call on the MCP server. And you can see the response is 10,000, and our inputs were 9999 and 1. So let's create a more advanced example. I'm now going to use wxflows or watsonx.ai Flows engine to create a tools endpoint, and this endpoint I'm going to be converting into an MCP server. If you go to the GitHub page of wxflows, you can find a couple of pre-built tools, but you can also build your own tools. I'm not going to build my own tool today. Instead, I'm going to use a pre-built tool. I can use a tool to get the weather or get information from Google Books or Wikipedia or convert one currency to another currency. I'm going to be using the Google Books tool. So I'm clicking here, and in here I can find a command to generate a new endpoint based on wxflows and the Google Books tool, and then how to deploy it. So I'm heading back to VS Code where I'm going to create a new Flows engine endpoint based on this definition here. In VS Code, I'm going to create a new directory, which I will call wxflows. And in here, I'm going to run the command to import the Google Books tool. So I'm going to cd into wxflows, and I'm going to copy paste this command. I already installed the Flows engine CLI, so I don't need to do this again. If we look at the wxflows directory, you can see a new file has been created, which is wxflows.toml. And in this file, you can find the reference to the Google Books tool. The only thing left is deploying this by running wxflows deploy. And this will create an endpoint that I can then use in my MCP server to handle tool calling. So this will be my endpoint, and then I also need my API key, which I can retrieve by running wxflows wmi --API key. So the output of this, you should store it somewhere because we're going to need it for a tool server. In the MCP server directory, we're now going to make a few changes to our index.ts file. It was set up to handle calculate sum. Now we're going to change it into a MCP server that's able to call tools from wxflows. For this, I first need to install the wxflows SDK. So I'm going to be moving into the MCP server directory. And in here, I'm going to run the command npm install add wxflows/SDK. And I'm going to be sure to install the latest beta version. After installing it, I can then start using the SDK right here on my server. I'm going to rename this to wxflows server. And then I need to import something from my wxflows SDK. So I'm going to be importing wxflows from this SDK right here. I'm going to save it, and then I need to set up the connection to wxflows. And for this, I'll be creating a new constant called tool client, which is going to need two environment variables, which is wxflows endpoint. So this was the endpoint you saw when you run wxflows deploy, and then your wxflows API key, which you can retrieve by using the command wxflows wmi --API key. And you're going to have to place this in a environment file. I have this environment sample file that you can use for reference. So back in here, I've set up my tool client. I now need to generate my tool definition and then the function to call the tool. To get the list of tools from Flows Engine, I can use the SDK. So I'm going to do something like constant tools is tool client dot tools. So this should retrieve the list of tools. And then I'm going to copy paste some boiler code to transform the tool definition from Flows Engine into a tool definition that fits whatever is needed by the MCP server. So this is a async function, so I need to await. You can see we're mapping the tools retrieved from Flows Engine, which is just the Google Books tool, and put it in the right definition required by MCP. So I'm going to save this, and now I should be able already to see the list of tools, which includes Google Books. But first, I'm going to implement the execution function as well. For the execution function, I can get rid of the boilerplate we had for calculate sum, and I'm going to insert this code instead. So what is happening here? You can see we aren't checking for a specific tool because there are many tools. We are taking a argument, which is query, and then we're retrieving the tool result using the Flows Engine SDK, where we're going to execute some GraphQL. So tools defined in Flows Engine will be made available as GraphQL tools. So I'm just going to save this, and then I need to run this npm run build command again. So I'm going to run npm run build, and this is going to build a new version of my MCP server that now includes Flows Engine. I then also need to open my Claude Desktop configuration, and in here you need to add two environment variables. So these environment variables are the ones for Flows Engine. So the same variables you have in this sample file, you need to add in the configuration here as well. I'm not going to show these because that would show you my environment keys, but it will look something like this. So you would have a field called environment, and these will have two names. This will be this one, and this should be a value, which is a string, and then you have the other one, which is a string value as well. And then you just save this and make sure to open Claude Desktop again. So if you already had it open, make sure to close it and reopen so the latest version of the MCP server will be made available there. In Claude Desktop, you can now see that we have more tools available. So we have the Google Books tool that we just created, and then we have a JSON tool, which is built into Flows Engine. So we're going to be focusing on the Google Books tool. And we're going to use this tool to ask a question about one of my favorite books. So what do you know about the book Escape by James Patterson? If we're asking this question, it's going to be looking at my tools, and then it's going to recommend to use the Google Books tool. We can also see the request it generates. It's going to do a GraphQL query, as I told you before, and we're going to be allowing this for this specific chat. It's now going to call the Google Books tool via Flows engine to retrieve more information. As you can see, it got the information from Google Books tool using Flows engine, and it's going to write it all down on this page. If we look at the tool calls, it did two specific tool calls. So first, it called a tool to retrieve general information about the book, including a volume ID, and then it's going to use this volume ID to retrieve even more information about the book, such as a detailed synopsis. And then information like who's the publisher, what's the page count, and when was the book published. So this is how easy it is to build your own MCP server, especially if you're using a tool platform such as Flows engine. And with Flows engine, you can build tools for any data source, or you can use one of the pre-built tools that we made available on our GitHub channel.